Welcome, Tima Bansal. Thanks for taking the time to join us today to talk about innovation, sustainability, and specifically the aspects that come up when academics and industry representatives work together on those issues. To start a bit general, could you maybe give us a few words on your background and how you got interested in these topics?
So thank you, Norma. I am really delighted to be able to talk about my work to this audience. I have been working in sustainability since the early 1990s. So soon after the WCED coined the term sustainable development. And I started off in a business school. So I've been thinking about sustainable development for over 25 years. And in recent years, I think that the whole notion of sustainable development has really taken a turn. We are now seeing challenges that we've never seen before. We're seeing rapid changes in the environment, and I don't just mean the natural environment, but the technological environment, the social environment, social institutions, that we need innovation more than ever. And so, whereas I looked at sustainability writ large for a long period of time, I now am really focused on how we can motivate organizations to move in a direction that's commensurate with intergenerational equity.
What we frequently see is that issues around the technological transformation that you just mentioned and issues relating more to the corporate social and environmental responsibility issues are quite separate within companies and organizations. So while corporate responsibility, sustainability is frequently delegated to CSR departments. Innovation is more of a central core business concern. Where do you see the linkages between those two issues within organizations?
I couldn't agree with you more. I do think that sustainability or responsibility tends to be siloed within organizations. They tend to have a strong auditing function. So it's the rules that the organization has to follow. So it's about compliance. And sustainability is often also a public relations activity. And so it's about all the good things companies doing. Innovation tends to be a core business function. So it's where the P&L, profit and loss, happens. It's what will determine the future markets of the organization. And it's very rare that a company anchors its innovation strategy in any way with sustainability. So sustainability is very much on the periphery. So where is the intersection? This is my own belief in this, but I don't believe that it's easy to get organizations to see sustainability as a core aspect of innovation. They're almost two different mindsets. Sustainability, if it's an auditing compliance function, tends to be incremental. It's about constraining the organization. It's about risk management. Innovation is about creativity. It's about seeing things in new ways. It's about what the possibilities are. It's long-term often, not always. And so given that those are two different worlds, it's really hard to get them to be embedded with each other. The way then that we can get sustainability into the innovation function, in my view, is to see sustainability differently. And so it's not about changing innovation, it's about changing sustainability. And the way that I see sustainability, it's taken me years to get here, but I definitely am a believer now, is that sustainability is just a systems problem. And so if we understand systems, we will solve sustainability issues. Now I'm talking about it not just as compliance, but also this opportunity to see the organization as a bigger piece of a bigger puzzle. So an organization that is understanding the larger systems is going to be much more innovative. They're going to approach problems very differently because then they see their problem as a problem nested within other problems. And then they're going to see it not just as a short-term innovation, not just as a short-term solution to a problem or an opportunity, but something that's more long-term as well. So as you think about if you think about innovation as innovating for systems, then sustainability becomes deeply rooted in the innovation function. So some of the research that I've done is in the Canadian oil sands. The Canadian oil sands are one of the most heavily polluting sectors, arguably the most polluting sector in Canada. So we're not talking about the oil and gas that goes through the consumption of oil and gas. We're talking about the production of oil and gas in Canada. And why it's so intensive, environmentally intensive, is because the oil is mixed in with a whole bunch of sand. So you have to separate all the toxins in the sand to get at least more usable oil, which has to be purified more and more to be something you put in your gas tank. So these oil sands companies have to make investments that are hundreds of millions of dollars. And so given the size of the investment, every investment that they make has a huge impact on the larger environment. So, and I don't just mean the ecological environment, but there are clearly land, air, and water issues that they have to confront. But they have to worry about Indigenous communities. They have to worry about ensuring that they have sufficient amount of labor in the northern part of Alberta, generally. They have to worry about all sorts of industrial ecosystem services. And a lot of the innovation isn't what they can do because they're these very, very large companies, but they have to then work with a network of SMEs. If they start to see what they do as a systems issue, as something that's both short-term, that they have to meet their current needs of provision of oil, and their long-term needs, then they start to see the problem in a very different way. And so in the short term, we have an issue with the distribution of oil, pipelines specifically. We're having constraints imposed on pipelines, moving the oil from the source to the market because of social movements. And so people don't want pipelines in their backyard, as you can imagine. And then we know that the backlash against Keystone Pipeline in the US. So the firms have to not only deal with trying to figure out how to deal with the extraction and distribution of oil in the short term, they recognize that in the long term that they have to really see things differently. And so as soon as they start to think about the long term, they start to think about what other types of distribution, possibly using the pipeline capacity that they have. They have to think about closing the mines ultimately, which means that they want to return it back to where it's usable land again. They should be thinking about electric vehicles and how that will change the use of fossil fuels for a lot of energy sources. So thinking about the system then helps them see the problem in a very different way, and they don't have to talk about sustainability. And yet sustainability is so integrated into what they do.
Mm-hmm. Can innovation managers actually learn something from the systems discourse on sustainability that we've had for the last 25 years, or maybe even longer? Because I think the systems perspective is really an aspect that is very connected to sustainability.
Where I think that we can learn from systems is from the simple principles of systems thinking, as opposed to trying to map a system. I think that people are terrified when they hear systems thinking because they're afraid that they're going to have to understand the whole system is too complex. And because it's too complex, it's unpredictable, and so therefore it's not very valuable. In fact, it's the contrary. I think that there's certain principles that really do help organizations change the way they see things. And so in a non-systems lens, we believe that there's linear predictions. And so if we change something on a track over a short period of time, we expect the path to change. In a systems approach, we realize that there's some degree of stability. And so innovation then isn't an activity that you do for a period of time. It's an activity, for example, that you have to do for a sustained period of time. And there will be some small wins, but ultimately some bigger wins. Or there's tipping points in systems thinking that you realize in the ICT world that it's not about having a certain number of partnerships or a certain number of adopters of a technology. It's about having a system of adopters of a technology. And so then you start to say, well, what is a smaller system in which we can have the technology adopted? And then how does that fit with other nested systems or other systems? And then you can start to see the contagion happen. Rather than trying to hit the whole field, you start to think about the ecosystem, the industrial ecosystem, quite differently.
You've been, I think, at the forefront for a very long time on a quest to make academic knowledge accessible also for industry, for managers. So I wanted to raise that with you and see where you feel the collaboration between academics and industry can be most successful, especially when we're talking about issues like sustainability.
Is about 13 years ago, I received some funding for the Network for Business Sustainability. It was intended to bring the two worlds together, academia and industry. And we did that in two ways. One is the distribution of knowledge, so the translation, distribution of academic knowledge into language that is accessible to managers. And then the other way that we did it was by assembling a group of managers across sectors that would get together and say, this is the research that we want to have done. We would then distribute those research questions more widely that they thought were important for them. And then also, they're also have two of those research questions researched each year. And so that we would facilitate that process with managers. And so that was wonderful because then we'd have this collaboration that was going on. So one was just translation, the other one was really collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
So what are my experiences with that, the do's and the don'ts? And maybe I will start with the first one, is that translation is hard. And we went through an evolutionary process of translation that started with first just taking the language and making it more accessible. But people weren't still picking up our work. And then we realized that maybe it's the questions that we're asking as academics. And so a lot of the questions that we asked was the why. Why would firms be environmentally responsible? Why would they integrate sustainability into innovation processes? And the questions that the managers wanted was a how. Managers wanted answered was a how. So managers want to know, how do I integrate sustainability into innovation? But not only the how in terms of something very generic, they wanted the how in terms of the next step. And so what do I do tomorrow? How do I organize my business? What is the leadership or cultural implications? So we found that we're asking the wrong questions and that even if we translated the knowledge, it wasn't going to be reached. And that was when we started to move towards this collaborative approach that managers started to give us the questions, and that we would then co-create the knowledge together. So it's not just a translation of more interesting questions, but that we start to build frameworks together that managers can use. So in this evolutionary process, we now recognize that managers are looking for a different type of knowledge. And we're still learning. We're still trying to figure out how to shift the landscape through a virtual knowledge platform. NBS has retained that function. But I'm going to move now to the second piece about the collaboration, how to get managers and researchers to collaborate. And we were quite successful with that collaboration, but not the ways that I expected. So we built these tools, and the tools are out there. There's many tools that are out there. When you think about the volume of tools that managers have accessible to them, it's vast. We learned that the real magic was not in the tools, not in the artifacts or the collateral that we develop afterwards. It was what happened in the room. And it's in the room. It's in, for example, this webinar that you're having. It's in this meetings when people get together with a consortium of others, that things change. And so now we realize that we have to create the rooms and not just the knowledge.
I was wondering whether you could share a specific success or even more interesting failure example where you would say we did something collaborative, we tried to translate knowledge between academia and industry, and something happened there that worked very well or that didn't work at all.
An example that I'd like to share with you is in the work that we've done with the oil sands, so the touch point going back to where we were. It's a collaborative clearly between researchers. We have researchers from the University of Alberta in Edmonton and the University of Quebec at Montreal, from Montreal, myself, working together with oil sands companies, two government departments, and an industry collaborative. And it was all set to succeed. Everybody was quite committed to it. What we didn't anticipate was that there is much more turnover in the industry than one could ever expect. We had 6 partners going in. We had every single partner, main point of contact, change. In one case, one company was sold to another company. The other company joined the project, but the key person, the chief technology officer, wasn't as committed as the first company was. In another case, one person retired, and so someone else took over. In another case is with the government, and government bureaucrats move very quickly through the system. And so we didn't have the adoption that we thought, partly because this long-term commitment in working together in these industry academic collaborations are very difficult because industry moves at a very different rate than academia does, and it's hard to match the two.
The time horizon that our project works towards is the year 2030. So that's when hopefully the Sustainable Development Goals will have come to fruition. It's far enough away that stuff will certainly change, but not so far away we won't live to see it. My question to you would be, how do you envision the way we will live and organizations will work by 2030? What will sustainability innovation have contributed or changed in the best way?
I've been working in sustainability almost as soon as it was coined. And it's gone through an evolution. Sustainability has really moved from thinking about it as corporate social responsibility to recognize and thinking about the business case to ultimately thinking about embedding it within the organization culture to then thinking about recognizing that sustainability has to be a system of organizations that move towards it. But ultimately, sustainability is all about intergenerational equity, that we want to ensure that our present generations ensure that the prosperity of future generations. And so if it's around intergenerational equity, then what's preventing us from reaching that equity? It's resources, it's natural resources. So we have to sustain natural resources. So what does sustainability look like in 2030 or ultimately? Is ensuring that all natural resources that are used are reused. And so it's a circular economy. A circular economy will get us to a spot where all organizations work in an industrial ecosystem that mirrors in time the temporality, the synchronicity of the natural cycles. And so that we use and reuse resources in a way, in this way that the planet can also use and reuse resources. So I think that's doable. I actually believe that we can move to that space. And the only other contingency is that we need to ensure that energy is from renewable resources. So innovation is key. If we're going to have the waste of one organization be the feedstock of another, then we have to rethink how physical goods are made. We have to ensure that they can be designed for disassembly, designed for reuse, And that applies to everything. So one of my doctoral students is working on paint, and he is interested in how paint can be reused. So something so small and yet so toxic. And so we have to reformulate what paint looks like. We have to be willing to look at paint differently. And we can't have white paint anymore. And we have to think about different ways of color, even consistency. And so where does innovation go? It goes to product innovation, it goes to chemistry, it goes to building business models, platform technologies, it goes to having this ability to connect. Organizations can use each other's waste efficiently. That's 2030, I hope.
Thanks for making the time.